So here I am, trying to figure out where it all went sideways. My wife Elena and I have been married for 18 years, met in college, built a life together, and somehow got stuck in the routine of it all. I guess you could say we took each other for granted. Marriage is supposed to be solid after almost 2 decades, right? Well, I thought so until a few months ago when she started acting different. It all began when Elena's company asked her to attend this big expo in another state. She was thrilled, a chance to network, learn, and reignite her passion for the job, as she put it. I didn't think much of it at the time. Honestly, I was proud of her. We'd been stuck in a rut, and she seemed genuinely excited about something for the first time in years. I should have paid more attention when she started preparing for it. She bought new clothes, not just workwear, but outfits that were a bit more flattering. She got her hair done, started wearing perfume she hadn't touched in years. "It's just professional," she said when I joked about her glamming up. I shrugged it off. After all, she deserved to feel good about herself. The week of the expo, she was practically glowing with excitement. I stayed home with our 2 teenage kids, juggling work and school drop-offs. We FaceTimed once a day, and she seemed fine, maybe a little distant. She told me about the interesting people she was meeting, but her descriptions were vague. I chalked it up to her being busy. It wasn't until she got back that things felt off. She was quieter than usual, like her mind was somewhere else. I asked her how the trip went, and she said it was amazing, but she didn't go into details. She used to share everything with me, but now, when I asked questions, her answers were clipped. That weekend we went out to dinner, something we hadn't done in months, and I noticed she kept checking her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't explain. I told myself not to overthink it. Trust is the foundation of marriage, right? But as the weeks went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers. I started noticing little lies, like when she said she was going out with coworkers, but her stories didn't add up. And then there were the late nights at the office that didn't seem entirely believable. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I wanted to believe that Elena was just going through a phase. What I didn't realize was that phase would turn our lives upside down. But that's the part I'll get to next. For now, I'm just trying to figure out if I could have stopped this before it all spiraled out of control. A few weeks after the expo, I came across something that stopped me cold. I wasn't snooping, I swear. Elena had left her laptop open on the dining table, and an email caught my eye, just a single line from the preview. "Looking forward to seeing you again soon." It was signed Nick. Nick? I'd never heard of a Nick from her work. For a moment, I told myself it could be nothing, maybe just a colleague or someone she met at the expo. But the email wasn't about work. The tone was too casual, too familiar. My gut twisted. I didn't read the whole thing. I didn't want to be that guy. But the preview wouldn't leave my head. That night, as we sat on the couch watching some reality show, I asked her about the expo again. "So, did you make any interesting connections? Anyone you've kept in touch with?" She barely looked at me. "Yeah, a few people. Mostly for networking." "Why?" I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Just curious. You've seemed different since you got back, like there's something on your mind." Elena's face tightened, just for a second, before she smiled. "It's nothing, Dawn. You're imagining things." I didn't press her. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, who's Nick, and why's he looking forward to seeing you?" That would have gone over well. Instead, I nodded, but her answer just planted more doubts. I couldn't let it go. The tipping point came a week later. She was heading out for another late meeting, dressed a little too nicely for what she claimed was a project deadline. As she grabbed her bag, I blurted, "Who's Nick?" Her whole body froze for a split second. Then she turned to me, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" "Nick," I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "I saw an email on your laptop. Something about seeing him again soon. Is there something you want to tell me?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't match her face. "Dawn, you're being ridiculous. Nick is just someone I met at the expo. He's in marketing. We talked about some ideas for collaboration, that's all." Her explanation sounded rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. But I didn't have proof. What was I supposed to do? Call her a liar based on a gut feeling? So I nodded, even though I didn't believe her. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "If it's just work, then fine." She kissed my cheek before walking out, but her touch felt hollow. I stood by the door, watching her drive away, and the sinking feeling in my chest only deepened. Something was happening, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying every little thing in my head, the lies, the phone, the email. Was I paranoid, or was she hiding something? By the time morning came, I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. But I wasn't prepared for what I'd uncover next. I decided to wait for Elena to slip up, but I didn't have the patience for that. The next day, when she was in the shower, I did something I'm not proud of. I checked her phone. It was sitting there on the counter, unlocked, with her messages open. At first, there was nothing. Just texts to coworkers, a group chat with her sister, and the usual stuff about school schedules for the kids. But then I found it. A text thread with someone saved as N. My heart pounded as I scrolled. Most of the messages were innocuous, references to work, a couple of memes, but then buried between jokes, was something that hit me like a freight train. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It was from her. The reply from N was worse. Same here. Can't wait to do it again. My chest tightened. I felt like I couldn't breathe. All the little things I'd been noticing, the late nights, the lies, the distance, suddenly made sense. This wasn't just a harmless flirtation. This was something more. I heard the water shut off in the bathroom, and panic set in. I quickly locked the phone and set it back on the counter where she'd left it. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to act normal. When Elena came out, towel wrapped around her, I couldn't even look at her. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone casual, like nothing was wrong. I nodded, afraid my voice would betray me if I spoke. That whole day, I was a mess. I couldn't focus on work. My thoughts kept spiraling. Who was this guy? How far had things gone? Was this just a fling, or was it the beginning of the end for us? That evening, after the kids were in bed, I confronted her. "Elena," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "I need you to be honest with me. Are you seeing someone else?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. "What? Dawn, no. Why would you even ask that?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, looking for any sign of the truth. "I saw your texts," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "With Nick." Her face went pale. For a second, she didn't say anything, and that silence was all the confirmation I needed. Then she stammered, "Dawn, it's not what you think. It's nothing. He's just a friend." "I swear. A friend." I echoed, my anger rising. "Friends don't text each other about how amazing last night was. Do you think I'm stupid?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But instead, she doubled down. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "We were drinking at the expo, and things got blurry. But it didn't mean anything. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd overreact." "Overreact?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You cheated on me, Elena. How am I supposed to react?" The fight escalated from there. She kept insisting it was a one-time thing, but I didn't believe her. The texts said otherwise. Still, she stuck to her story, and eventually, I was too exhausted to argue anymore. I just went to bed, leaving her crying on the couch. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Whatever she'd done with Nick wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And I wasn't sure I could forgive her for it. The next morning, Elena acted like nothing had happened. She made breakfast for the kids, chatted about their weekend plans, and even gave me a peck on the cheek before heading to work. But I wasn't fooled. Her cheerful front only deepened my sense of betrayal. After she left, I called in sick and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee. I kept replaying the fight in my head, dissecting every word she said. Was she really sorry, or was she just sorry I found out? The texts didn't read like a one-night mistake. They read like an ongoing affair. I needed answers, real ones this time. I wasn't going to take her word for it anymore. So I did something else I'm not proud of. I opened her laptop. It was easier than I expected. She hadn't changed her password in years, and her email was still logged in. I hesitated for a second, my finger hovering over the touchpad, but then I thought about those texts. Whatever trust we'd had was already gone. I clicked. There it was, a string of emails between her and Nick. Some of them were innocent enough, work-related topics, discussions about industry trends, but others weren't. One stood out. The subject line read, "Thinking of you." My stomach churned as I opened it. "Elena, I know we agreed to keep things professional, but I can't stop thinking about you. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. I hope last week wasn't the end for us. Let me know if you're free to meet again soon." Her reply made my blood run cold. "Nick, I feel the same way, but we need to be careful. Dawn is already suspicious, and I can't risk losing my family. Let's talk soon." The room seemed to spin. She wasn't just cheating, she was calculating. She'd been weighing the risks, deciding how much she could get away with. And I'd been sitting here, hoping she'd come clean. I closed the laptop and pushed it away like it was toxic. I felt sick, angry, betrayed. But more than anything, I felt foolish. How had I let this happen? How had I missed the signs? When Elena came home that evening, I was waiting for her in the living room. She must have seen the look on my face, because she didn't even take her coat off. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cautious. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I held up my phone, where I'd taken photos of the emails. "This," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "This is what's wrong." Her face went pale again, but this time, she didn't bother denying it. "Dawn, You lied to me," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You said it was a mistake, a one-time thing. But these emails? They tell a different story." She sat down on the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice muffled. "Well, congratulations," I snapped. "You failed." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the clock ticking on the wall. Then she looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Dawn. I love you. I love our family. I got caught up in something I didn't know how to stop." "That's not an excuse," I said coldly. "You made a choice, Elena. You chose him over me, over us." Her tears fell harder, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies, the betrayal, the complete disregard for everything we'd built together. "What happens now?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But this isn't something we can just move past." That night, I slept in the guest room. For the first time in 18 years, I didn't kiss my wife goodnight. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I ever would again. A few days later, Elena suggested we take the kids to my parents for the weekend and spend some time alone. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her tone serious but not defensive. I wasn't thrilled about being alone with her, but I agreed. The house had been suffocating with tension, and we needed to figure out where to go from here. That Saturday, we drove to a nearby lake and rented a canoe. It was her idea, a nod to the early days of our marriage, when we'd go canoeing and talk for hours. Back then, it felt like we could conquer anything together. Now, the silence between us felt like a wall neither of us could scale. We paddled in circles for a while, avoiding eye contact. Finally, she set her paddle down and looked at me. "I need to tell you everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stopped paddling, letting the canoe drift. "Go ahead," I said, bracing myself. She hesitated, her hands trembling. "Nick and it wasn't just the expo. We've met a few times since then." I wanted to stop, but I didn't. I liked the attention. I liked feeling wanted. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I clenched my fists, staring at the water. "So what now?" I asked, my voice flat. "Are you in love with him?" "No," she said quickly. "I swear, Dawn, it wasn't about love. It was stupid and selfish, and I hate myself for it." "Do you?" I snapped, finally looking at her. "Because it feels like you only hate that you got caught." She didn't answer. Instead, tears streamed down her face as she looked away. "I've already told Nick it's over," she said finally. "I blocked his number. I want to fix this. Fix us." I laughed bitterly. "Fix us? Elena, you blew us up. Do you even understand what you've done?" She nodded, wiping her face. "I do. And I know it's not enough, but I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please, Dawn. Just tell me there's still a chance." I didn't answer. The lake was so quiet I could hear the soft ripples against the canoe. I wanted to believe her, but trust wasn't something you could just glue back together. Still, a small part of me wondered if we could somehow rebuild, if not for us, then for the kids. I don't know, I said finally. I really don't. We paddled back in silence. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. Or maybe the end of everything we'd once had. I wasn't sure yet. After the canoe trip, I couldn't stop thinking about Nick. If Elena was serious about fixing things, I needed to know she meant it, and that meant confronting the man who'd helped tear our marriage apart. I found Nick's profile on LinkedIn easily enough. His work email was listed, so I sent him a simple message: "We need to talk. You know who I am. Meet me at Java Brew on 3rd Street, Friday at 6 p.m. To my surprise, he replied within the hour, "Fine. I'll be there." When Friday came, I arrived early, choosing a corner table where I could watch the door. I wasn't sure what I expected: a smug, confident guy ready to defend himself? Or maybe someone contrite, willing to apologize? Either way, I was determined to make my point. Nick walked in right on time. He was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with an air of self-assuredness that made my blood boil. As soon as he spotted me, his smile faltered, and he approached cautiously. "You must be Don," he said, sitting down without being invited. "Look, before you say anything, I just want to apologize." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice cold. "I didn't come here for excuses. I came to tell you to stay away from my wife." Nick raised his hands defensively. "I get it. I do. What happened was a mistake, and it's over. Elena made that clear." "Good," I said sharply. "Because if I find out you've contacted her again, I won't be so civil next time." He nodded, swallowing hard. For a moment, I thought that might be it. But then he leaned forward, his expression softening. "Look, Don, I know you don't want to hear this, but Elena's not the only one to blame. I shouldn't have pursued her, but she wasn't exactly pushing me away." My hands clenched into fists under the table. "I know what my wife did," I said through gritted teeth. "And trust me, I'm dealing with that. But you? You saw a married woman and went for it anyway. That says everything about the kind of person you are." Nick looked away, guilt flashing across his face. "I never wanted to ruin her life. Or yours." "Then stay out of it," I said, standing up. "You don't belong in this story anymore." Without waiting for a reply, I walked out. I didn't feel triumphant or relieved. If anything, the confrontation left me emptier than before. Nick might have been part of the problem, but the real challenge was waiting for me at home. That night, Elena asked how I was feeling. "Tired," I said. I didn't tell her about meeting Nick. Part of me wanted to spare her the details. Part of me didn't know how to explain it. But I did know one thing: if she truly wanted to rebuild our marriage, it was going to take more than promises. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready for what came next. After confronting Nick, I felt like I'd closed one chapter of this mess, but it didn't make the next part any easier. That weekend, I sat down with Elena after the kids went to bed. If we were going to even attempt rebuilding, we needed ground rules. "Elena, we need to talk," I said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. She nodded silently, her face pale. "I met with Nick," I said bluntly. Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. "I told him to stay away from you." He agreed. She looked down, her hands trembling. "I didn't ask you to do that," she said softly. "I didn't do it for you," I shot back. "I did it for me, for us. If we're going to try and move forward, I need to know he's out of the picture." She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "He is, Dawn. I swear." "Good," I said, taking a deep breath. "But it's not just about Nick. Things have to change, Elena. If you want me to even consider giving this a chance, I need full transparency. No more secrets. No more lies. I need access to everything: your phone, your email, your social media. Whatever it takes to rebuild trust." She looked hesitant, but then she nodded. "Okay. You can have it all. And one more thing," I added, leaning forward. "I want us to start counseling. Together and separately. We can't fix this on our own." Her lip quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she said, "I'll do whatever it takes, Dawn. I know I've hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me." Her words sounded sincere, But sincerity wasn't enough. I needed action. I needed proof that she was willing to do the work. The next day, we called a counselor and scheduled our first session for the following week. Elena handed over her phone and passwords without hesitation, and while it felt invasive, it also gave me a small sense of control. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I wondered if this was the start of something new or just a band-aid over a marriage that was already broken beyond repair. Only time would tell. But for now, we were still trying. And that had to count for something. The following week, Elena and I sat side by side in a softly lit office, staring at a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Megan Harper. She had kind eyes and a calm demeanor, but the awkwardness in the room was suffocating. It was the first time in weeks Elena and I had been in the same space without tension brimming just beneath the surface. Dr. Harper began with the basics: names, how long we'd been married, why we were there. Elena spoke first, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake," she admitted. "I betrayed Don's trust, and now I'm trying to earn it back." Her words were clinical, stripped of emotion, and it grated on me. "A mistake," I repeated, turning to her. "It wasn't a mistake, Elena. It was a choice." Over and over again. Dr. Harper raised her hand gently. "Don, I understand how you feel, but let's focus on constructive communication. Can you tell Elena what you need from her moving forward?" I clenched my fists, taking a moment to breathe. "I need honesty," I said, my voice tight. "No more half-truths or excuses. If we're going to work on this, I need to believe that what she's saying is real." Dr. Harper nodded, then turned to Elena. "How do you feel about that?" Elena wiped at her eyes, tears already streaming. "I understand why he doesn't trust me. I hate that I've put him in this position. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I'm committed to this marriage." The session went on like that: awkward pauses, painful admissions, moments of frustration. Dr. Harper suggested small exercises for us to rebuild trust, setting aside time each day to talk openly, creating a plan for boundaries and transparency, and practicing empathy, even when it felt impossible. By the end of the hour, I felt drained. Elena reached for my hand as we walked back to the car, but I pulled away. "Not yet," I said quietly. Her face fell, but she nodded, respecting the boundary. Back home, I found myself replaying the session. Dr. Harper had asked us to think about why we wanted to stay in the marriage. For me, it wasn't just about the years we'd built together. It was about the kids, the family we'd created, and the hope, however small, that we could find our way back to something good. But it wasn't enough to hope. Actions would speak louder than words, and we were just at the beginning. The next few days felt heavy. Elena and I tried to follow Dr. Harper's suggestions, carving out time to talk each evening. The conversations were civil, even productive at times, but the distance between us still lingered. I wasn't ready to trust her, and she knew it. Meanwhile, the kids started picking up on the tension. Our son Ryan, who's 16, isn't one to keep things bottled up. One evening, as I was fixing dinner, he came into the kitchen, leaning against the counter. "Dad," he said, folding his arms, "what's going on with you and Mom?" I paused, the knife still in my hand. "What do you mean?" He rolled his eyes. "Come on. You guys are barely talking. Mom's been crying in the bathroom like every day, and you've been sleeping in the guest room. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" I sighed, setting the knife down. I'd been hoping to keep the kids out of it, at least until Elena and I figured out where we stood. "Ryan, your mom and I are working through some things. Marriage isn't always easy." "That's it?" he asked, his tone sharp. "You're just gonna give me the generic marriage is hard speech?" "I don't think you'd want the details," I said carefully. "But I promise, whatever happens, we're going to do what's best for the family." Ryan stared at me for a moment, his jaw tightening. "You know, Dad, we're not little kids anymore. You don't have to protect us from everything. We can handle the truth." I wanted to tell him more, to let him in on the turmoil swirling inside me, but I couldn't. It wasn't his burden to bear. "I know, buddy. But this is between your mom and me. Just trust that we're doing everything we can to figure it out." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded and walked out of the kitchen. That night, as I lay in the guest room, I thought about what he said. I'd been so focused on my own pain and anger that I hadn't fully considered how all of this was affecting the kids. They deserved stability, even if Elena and I were struggling to find our footing. The next day, Elena brought it up before I could. "Ryan's been avoiding me, she said softly as we sat on the couch after dinner. I think he knows something's wrong. He asked me about it, I admitted. I told him we're working through things. She nodded, biting her lip. Maybe we should talk to them together. Not about everything, but enough so they don't feel like we're shutting them out. It wasn't a bad idea. The last thing I wanted was for the kids to feel like they were in the dark, or worse, like this was somehow their fault. Okay, I said. We'll talk to them this weekend. But we keep it simple. They don't need the messy details. Elena agreed, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of the woman I used to know, the one who put our family first. It didn't erase what she'd done, but it was a start. That weekend, Elena and I sat the kids down in the living room. Ryan and our 13-year-old daughter, Lily, looked uneasy, probably picking up on the serious tone of our voices. Your mom and I want to talk to you about something, I began. We know you've noticed some tension between us lately. Ryan folded his arms, clearly bracing himself for bad news. Lily just looked back and forth between us, her brow furrowed. Elena took over. First, we want you to know that none of this is your fault. Your dad and I are going through a rough patch, but we're working on it. We've started counseling, and we're doing everything we can to figure things out. Lily's face fell. Does that mean you're getting divorced? No, I said quickly, shaking my head. Right now, we're focusing on fixing things. That's why we've been having these long talks and why I've been sleeping in the guest room. It doesn't mean we're giving up. Ryan, ever the skeptic, frowned. So what's the rough patch about? Did one of you screw up? Elena and I exchanged a quick, nervous glance. We'd agreed not to share too much, but Ryan's bluntness caught me off guard. Sometimes, in a marriage, people make mistakes, Elena said carefully. And when that happens, it takes time to rebuild trust. That's what we're doing. Ryan's expression hardened, and I could tell he was putting the pieces together. So one of you cheated, he said flatly. Lily gasped. Ryan, she hissed, glaring at him. I held up a hand to stop the argument brewing between them. What happened between your mom and me is between us, I said firmly. The important thing is that we're committed to working through it. Ryan leaned back, his jaw tight. Whatever, he muttered, looking away. Lily, meanwhile, burst into tears. But you're not breaking up, right? She sobbed. I don't want you to split up. Elena moved to her side, wrapping her arms around her. No, sweetheart. We're not splitting up. We're doing everything we can to stay together, for us and for you. I nodded, my throat tight. We're a family, Lily. No matter what happens, that won't change. The conversation ended soon after that, with Lily clinging to Elena and Ryan storming off to his room. It wasn't the smoothest talk, but at least the kids knew the basics now. The weight of secrecy had been lifted, even if it left some sharp edges behind. Later that night, Elena and I sat in silence on the couch, both of us exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. That could have gone better, she said softly. Could have gone worse too, I replied, my voice flat. We were trying, but I couldn't ignore the cracks in the foundation we were standing on. And I wondered how long it would be before one of us fell through. The house felt quieter than usual in the days following our talk with the kids. Ryan avoided both of us, throwing himself into video games and long walks with his friends. Lily stuck close to Elena, always asking if she was okay, as if worried her mom might disappear. Meanwhile, Elena and I tried to follow the routines Dr. Harper suggested. Every night, we sat down after the kids went to bed and talked. It wasn't easy. The conversations were strained, awkward, and sometimes painful, but they were necessary. One night, I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Why, Elena? Why did you risk everything for him? She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. I wish I had a good answer, she said quietly. I wasn't happy, Dawn. Not with you, but with myself. I felt invisible, stuck in a routine, like I wasn't enough anymore. You didn't tell me that, I said, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. You could have talked to me, Elena. We could have worked on it together. I know, she said, her voice breaking. But I didn't. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Her honesty stung, but it also felt like progress. For the first time, she wasn't making excuses. She was owning what she'd done, even if it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. In the following days, she made more small gestures to show she was committed. She deleted her social media accounts, saying they were too much of a temptation. She started cooking dinner again, something she'd stopped doing months ago, and spent more time with the kids. But trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. While I appreciated her efforts, I couldn't shake the images in my head, her and Nick, the messages, the lies. Every time she left the house, I felt a pit in my stomach, wondering if she was really where she said she'd be. At our next counseling session, I brought it up. I want to believe her, I admitted to Dr. Harper. But every time I look at her, I wonder if she's lying to me again. That's normal, Dr. Harper said. Trust takes time to rebuild. It won't happen all at once, and that's okay. Elena, what are you willing to do to help Dawn feel secure? Elena turned to me, her eyes filled with guilt. Anything, she said. If you need to check my phone every day, I'll let you. If you want me to call you when I'm out, I'll do it. Whatever it takes. I nodded, appreciating her willingness, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about her actions. It was about me learning to let go of the anger and fear. And I wasn't sure how long that would take. For now though, we were moving forward, slowly, cautiously, but forward nonetheless. A couple of weeks passed, and things settled into a fragile routine. Elena kept up her efforts, checking in with me when she was out, leaving her phone where I could see it, even sharing her calendar. It helped, but only a little. Trust wasn't something you could track like an app. Ryan was still distant. He'd eat dinner with us, but his walls were up, and he barely spoke. Lily, on the other hand, hovered around Elena constantly, as though afraid she might disappear if left alone too long. Watching how the affair had rippled through the kids made the wound feel even deeper. One evening, I came home from work to find Ryan in the garage, shooting hoops into the old net we'd hung up when he was 10. I grabbed a ball and joined him, bouncing it a few times before taking a shot. It missed, of course. "You're terrible at this," he muttered, not even smiling. "I know," I said, trying again. "I wasn't much better when I was your age." He didn't respond, just kept shooting. I decided to try a different approach. "Ryan, I know you're upset. And I don't blame you." This time, he stopped. The ball hit the rim and bounced away as he turned to me. "Upset? I'm not upset, Dad. I'm furious." I nodded, letting him vent. "I get it." "No you don't," he snapped, his voice rising. "You're staying with her. After everything she did, you're just staying. How can you do that?" I took a deep breath, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "It's not that simple, Ryan. Marriage isn't black and white. It's messy, and sometimes people make mistakes." "Mistakes," he said, his face red with anger. "She didn't trip and fall into an affair, Dad. She made a choice. And you're just letting her get away with it." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I'm not letting her get away with anything. She's trying to fix what she broke, and I'm giving her a chance. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean I've forgiven her." He shook his head, picking up the ball again. "You're stronger than me," he muttered before sinking a perfect shot. That night, I told Elena about the conversation. She looked devastated but didn't say much. "I'll talk to him," she said quietly. The next day, she did. I don't know what was said, but Ryan's attitude thawed just a little. He wasn't ready to forgive, but he wasn't as cold either. Meanwhile, Lily continued clinging to Elena, asking her constant questions about where she was going, when she'd be back, and if she'd stay for bedtime. It broke my heart to see our daughter so unsure of the stability we'd always promised her. Despite these cracks, Elena and I pressed on. We went to counseling, followed Dr. Harper's advice, and tried to rebuild something that felt like a marriage. But every step forward felt like walking on thin ice, and I couldn't shake the fear that we were one misstep away from falling through. In an effort to restore some sense of normalcy, Elena suggested a family dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. It had always been a place of happy memories, birthday celebrations, post-soccer game feasts, and just because nights out. I agreed, hoping it might help the kids feel like things were moving forward. When we arrived, Lily brightened immediately, admiring the red and white checkered tablecloths and the candles flickering in little glass jars. Ryan, on the other hand, was glued to his phone, only looking up to order his food. The first half of the meal went smoothly. Lily told us about a group project she was working on, and Elena chimed in with enthusiasm, asking questions and offering advice. Ryan stayed quiet, eating his spaghetti like it was a chore. When the waiter cleared our plates, Elena tried to engage Ryan. "So, how's school going? Any news on the basketball tryouts?" He glanced up, his expression neutral. It's fine. Elena pressed on, her tone light. Are you excited about the team? You've been practicing so much. That's when he snapped. Why do you care, Mom? He said, his voice sharp. You didn't care about the rest of us when you were busy sneaking around. The table went silent. Lily's eyes widened as she stared at Ryan, her fork halfway to her mouth. Elena's face crumpled, and she reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Ryan, please, she began, her voice trembling. Don't, he said, standing up. Don't act like everything's fine. It's not. And it's never going to be. Before I could stop him, he grabbed his phone and stormed out of the restaurant. The people at the surrounding tables turned to look at us, their curiosity thinly veiled. Lily started to cry, and Elena covered her face with her hands. I stood up, tossing some cash on the table for the bill. I'll go after him, I muttered. I found Ryan outside, pacing along the sidewalk. When he saw me, he stopped, his shoulders tense. I'm not going back in there, he said flatly. Ryan, I know you're angry. You don't know anything, he interrupted, glaring at me. You're just pretending this is all fine because you're too scared to leave her. His words hit hard, but I kept my voice calm. I'm not pretending. I'm trying to hold this family together. For you, for Lily, for all of us. He shook his head, tears in his eyes. It's not working. We stood there in silence for a while, the cool night air pressing down on us. Finally, I said, you don't have to forgive her, Ryan. Not now, not ever. But you need to think about what you want for yourself, for this family. Anger won't fix anything. He didn't respond, but he let me put a hand on his shoulder and steer him toward the car. When we got back inside, Elena and Lily were silent, their faces pale. The ride home was tense, and when we pulled into the driveway, Ryan went straight to his room without a word. That night, Elena cried quietly in our bed while I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the floor. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't have the strength. We were trying to piece things back together, but moments like tonight reminded me just how far we had to go. The fallout from the dinner lingered for days. Ryan refused to talk to Elena, barely speaking to me except when absolutely necessary. Lily, always the peacemaker, tried to bridge the gap, but it only seemed to make things harder for her. Every time she saw Ryan ignore Elena, her face crumpled with guilt, like she thought she wasn't doing enough to keep us all together. Elena, meanwhile, was a shadow of herself. She tried to keep up the routines, helping Lily with homework, planning meals, and following through with counseling, but the spark that once defined her was gone. It wasn't just guilt eating away at her, it was the growing realization that fixing this wasn't going to be quick or easy. One evening, after the kids were asleep, she finally broke. I was in the guest room, scrolling through emails, when she knocked softly on the door and came in without waiting for a response. Dawn, she said, her voice shaky, I can't keep doing this if you're not really with me. I set my phone down, frowning. What are you talking about? She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the edge tightly. You're here, but you're not here. I can feel it every time you look at me, every time we talk. You're holding back. And I get it, I don't deserve your trust right now. But if you've already decided you're never going to forgive me, then just say it. Don't drag this out. Her words stung, but they also hit a nerve. She wasn't wrong. I was going through the motions, hoping time and effort would fix the fracture, but deep down, I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her. The betrayal was too big, too raw. I don't know, Elena, I said honestly. I don't know if I can forgive you. I want to for the kids, for us, but every time I think about it, it feels impossible. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded, her face a mask of resignation. I understand, she whispered. But if you don't think there's any hope, then we need to stop pretending. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. She was broken in ways I hadn't fully allowed myself to see. But beneath the pain and guilt, there was still the woman I'd fallen in love with years ago. The one who'd built a life with me, who'd raised 2 incredible kids by my side. I haven't given up, I said finally, my voice low. But this isn't just about forgiving you. It's about figuring out if we can even rebuild what's left. She nodded again, wiping her cheeks. I'll keep trying, she said, her voice steadier now. Even if you don't know yet, I'll keep trying. When she left the room, I leaned back against the headboard, her words echoing in my mind. This was the breaking point, not just for her, but for me. I had to decide whether to fight for this marriage or let it go. For the first time, I wasn't sure which choice would hurt less. The morning after Elena's breakdown, I woke up feeling like I'd barely slept. Her words from the night before still weighed heavily on me. If you've already decided you're never going to forgive me, then just say it. She was right. Dragging this out without committing one way or the other wasn't fair to her, to me, or to the kids. Over coffee, I decided to clear my head with a long walk. The crisp morning air was refreshing, but it didn't stop the flood of memories. I thought about our early days, our first date, how she'd laughed at all my stupid jokes. I thought about the way she'd cradled Ryan as a newborn, humming softly to him in the middle of the night. And I thought about the betrayal, the texts, the lies, and the fallout that had left our family fractured. When I got home, I found Ryan in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball around by himself. He didn't look up as I approached, so I took a deep breath and stepped onto the grass. "Can we talk?" I asked. He shrugged, not stopping his kicks. "What's there to talk about?" "Plenty," I said, walking over to stand beside him. "I know you're angry. And you have every right to be. But I need you to understand something." This time he paused, glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. "What?" "I'm not staying with your mom because it's easy or because I'm weak," I said carefully. "I'm staying because I still believe there's something worth fighting for. I don't know if we can fix this, but I have to try. For you, for Lily, and for us." Ryan sighed, kicking the ball again. "She broke your trust, Dad. How do you just move past that?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "You don't move past it," I said finally. "You work through it. It's not about forgetting what she did. It's about deciding if the love we've built is stronger than the mistakes she made." He didn't respond right away, but the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease a little. "I guess I get it," he muttered. "Doesn't mean I like it." "I don't expect you to," I said. "I just want you to know why I'm doing this." Later that day, I found Elena in the kitchen, folding laundry. She looked up as I walked in, her expression cautious, like she was bracing for more bad news. "We need to talk," I said, sitting down at the table. She set the laundry aside and joined me, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot," I began. "About everything. And I realized something last night. You're not the only one who has to fight for this. I do too." Her breath hitched, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Let me finish," I said. "This isn't me saying I've forgiven you. I haven't. And I don't know when, or if, that will happen. But I know that if we don't both commit to trying, this marriage is already over." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dawn. I mean that." "I need more than promises, Elena," I said firmly. "We both need to show up for this. That means continuing counseling, being honest about everything, no matter how hard it is, and rebuilding the trust we lost. If we're going to make this work, it has to be real. No shortcuts." "I understand," she whispered. "I'm all in." For the first time in weeks, I felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to light a path forward. That night, we told the kids about our decision. Ryan's reaction was muted, his face guarded, but Lily's relief was palpable. "So you're not giving up?" she asked, her voice tentative. "No," I said, glancing at Elena. "We're not giving up. We're going to try." The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be setbacks, arguments, and moments of doubt. But as I lay awake that night, listening to the soft hum of the house, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a sliver of peace. We were still in the fight, and for now, that was enough.